Senator Pat Toomey. Senator Toomey, it's always a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thanks for having me, Judge.
The president earlier today, through Senator Reid and later through himself, said that people earning more than $1 million a year, I don't know if they mean that in adjusted gross income or how they measure it, but people earning more than $1 million a year should pay higher taxes. Senator, won't raising taxes actually interfere with economic recovery?
Well, of course it will, Judge. We know that, and this is not a serious effort. What this is just a traditional ploy to engage in class warfare, see if they can gin up some resentment towards successful and prosperous people and try to derail these discussions, which ought to be about getting a government to live within its means, cutting the egregiously excessive spending that's been occurring. So as long as I see proposals like this, which are totally unserious, I know that they're not yet ready to tackle the real problems that we face.
Do you have a better idea than anybody else what your colleague, Senator Cornyn from Texas, was talking about when he said a mini deal? Would that be just a little bit of borrowing for a finite period of time, basically delaying to a further day the debate that ought to be taking place now on whether or not the government can dig us deeper into debt, or whether it has to live on the $250 billion a month it collects in tax revenues?
Yeah. I know this idea has been bouncing around. Frankly, I think it's a bad idea. And the reason is, it's not as though this debt limit crisis didn't come with a lot of warning. Some of us, like you and I and many others, have been talking about this for at least 6 months. Right. There's no surprise here. And if we don't have the political will to address this and solve this overspending problem now, why should we think we're going to have that will in a month or 2 months or 3 months? We need to solve this problem now for once and for all.
Senator, you wrote one of the most important pieces in this entire debate, which, as I recall, was about a half-page op-ed in the Wall Street Journal a few months ago, in which you articulated dollar by dollar how the government can pay its debts, pay its creditors, meet its obligations without borrowing more money. Do you stand today on the words you articulated a few months ago in that piece?
Oh, every one of them, Judge. Nothing has changed. The fundamental reality remains that if we don't raise the debt ceiling at the date designated by the Treasury Secretary, that does not need to result in a default on our debt. The ongoing tax revenue is more than 10 times what the Treasury needs to pay the interest on our debt and continue to roll over principal. They know that, but what they've tried to do is to intimidate Republicans into voting for a debt limit increase with no conditions attached, because they just want to continue borrowing and spending. Now, I've acknowledged that, shutting off all borrowing cold turkey and requiring the government to live on the tax revenue alone is very disruptive. It's very sudden. I think, frankly, you ought to have a more gradual transition to a balanced budget, which is what I'm for. But the administration has been very, very misleading in suggesting that we're going to have a default on our debt. Isn't going to happen, doesn't need to happen, and if it were to happen, it would be their doing.
Senator, have you heard some of the arguments made today by journalists on the left? And in fairness to the White House, I have not heard this from the White House yet, that because of a couple of phrases in the 14th Amendment basically saying the obligations of the United States government shall not be called into question, the president alone could borrow money without lawful authority from the Congress? Does he really believe that, or do you think the Congress would let him do that?
Judge, I mean, this probably made your head want to explode the way it did to me. As you and I both know very well, Article 2 of the Constitution delegates to Congress exclusively the power to authorize the creation of debt, the borrowing of money. The 14th Amendment is about the obligation to honor those commitments.
Right.
There's no way that the administration has the authority to go out and borrow money unless Congress grants them that authority. So I certainly hope that there's no one in the administration who's even thinking about flagrantly violating the law and circumventing Congress.
Senator Toomey, you're in the thick of this, and I'm happy you're sticking to your guns. Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thanks for having me, Judge.
America is drowning in debt, causing many to lose faith in the economy.